February is Black History Month. As we all age, the memories of segregation seems to dim, unless a person was victim of that segregation. This is Jewel Bell. She's been involved in several organizations around Bristol for as long as most people can remember.
I have always been a person that's tried to help others. I feel that's what God has me here for. I've done volunteer work for the Red Cross in the past when food stamps first were introduced to the United States. I've had 10 houses that I visited trying to introduce the food stamp program. I was with the Appalachian Girl Scout program for I don't know how long. We had all the cookies behind my front door. They were 35 cents a box at the time, and I was in charge of the little girls coming and checking them out, selling them. I was in charge of all the money. When it came time to turn the money in, I had to write the biggest check, because every Sunday night my husband was over the Baptist Training Unit at Lee Street. They'd have to have hot cocoa and cooked Girl Scout cookies, so we had eaten more cookies than we had sold. So it was all through that. And I've been on the board of directors at the Y. I can't even, you'd have to go by and ask them to look up. Because they called me in the 60s before integration, and that's why I stick with them, because they were the Young Women's Christian Association. And when Urban Renewal moved us from down on Woodlawn, you probably don't even know where Woodlawn was. Well, that's where the first YWCA started. When they moved us, the first thing the YMCA wanted was for us to merge with them, and it just be called the Family Y, because they wanted our money. And we fought it, and I was one of the ones that fought it, because the first thing I said was it would never work because we would no longer have a voice. The men would take over, because I was married to a husband that was 9 years old when I was born, so I knew all about how you all operate.
And that's Jewel Bell. If you don't want to know the answer, don't ask her the question.
Well, it's just like, we have the tribute to women, the YWCA, and I was one of the first blacks that got that honor back in the 90s. Well, for the month of April, my picture was all up and down State Street. And anyway, the Herald Courier came right in this very room, right with this very window, and interviewed me. And they said that the editor from the Bristol Herald Courier had such a fit when he got the story. He said, this goes on the front page. So there I was, all sprawled out in that chair on the front page. And that little girl, bless her heart, she's so sweet. I think she wrote every word I said. If I sneezed, I believe she would have said, and Jewel sneezed. But one thing in there that the English professor told me that he loved better than anything in the thing. When the switchboard came, they had about 10 men in Parks Hall checking it all out, and some of them were probably in training. And so the head man went to Inez Morton and said, Mrs. Morton, who will be working the switchboard? He was giving her the manual, because they sent a lady called Miss Lambert. All she did was train operators throughout Abingdon, Johnson City, Kingsport, because switchboards weren't that popular then. And she said, Mrs. Bell will be doing it. That's where she talked. And the man looked at her and said, well, we don't have any blacks operators in this area because of the way they talk. So I put that in the article on the front page of the Herald Courier, that very statement. And I said, and my question was, how do we talk?
Miss Bell has worked at King University since the 1950s, long before integration. She is known and loved by students and alumni, and she was given a special honor by the school.
All I can say, it's a great place. I guess it's been about 3 years ago now, they honored me with the Jewel H. Bell Scholarship, and money comes in around the clock. That's another thing that made me cry. If a young person, male or female, is having problems financially, and they really want to stay here, they get $1,000 to help them, to keep them getting started on a new route. And there's a picture someplace here of the first recipient. It's a young man, I think he was from Bluff City. He got the first $1,000. That a trustee who was here in the 90s, just before Thanksgiving, sent in a sizable check. I don't discuss what it was, but it was not 500, it was not 600. It was a sizable check. And I don't even recall having that much communication with this particular person. But they send it in, they designate it's for the Jewel H. Bell Scholarship. And those things have made me cry also. Because see, when I started working in the 50s, they didn't have but a couple of majors. See, now we have everything, and we have colleges everywhere. I have hosted open house at the Knoxville campus myself. I've hosted a picnic at Pellissippi, which is right across from our campus in Knoxville. You know, we have a campus in Nashville. We have campuses all over Johnson City and Kingsport. We have campuses in Richland, Virginia. We have a campus down at Northeast State. We're part of all these various schools. And our professors travel these different places, and we've really grown, and we have just so much. And I mean, that's what it's about. If we didn't have these different things, kids would go out. We have online, and of course, my generation, I'm 85, and I was talking to Dr. Ray and his wife earlier today. Thank God that I have sense enough to agree with change, whether I like it or not. I know that this is what life is about. You can't keep doing what you did yesterday. Yeah, good, great for the good old days, but I sure don't want them back, okay?
The good old days for Mrs. Bell wasn't as good as they could have been.
The only part about segregation that really bothered me was when my children were born, and we would drive down State Street on Saturday morning and see the white kids with Coke bottles were glass thin, and they could go in the theater with a bottle cap. And my babies would look up and see Mickey Mouse or something pertaining to Disney World, and they couldn't understand why they couldn't go. And that was such a hard subject for me to explain to them at their age to make them understand. And so my only response at that time was always, God made flowers when he made us, and he made some of us different colors because he had a bouquet. And that was the only way I could explain at that time. And as time went on, you know, I could elaborate further. But that was about the only thing that made me cry and hurt me. Because I made it through when I was growing up. We lived in a totally black neighborhood, but there was one white family next door. And this man and my mother would share crops through the fence when they were doing their garden. And they had one daughter, and she and I would play jack rocks with rocks, not jack rocks in the store, rocks. And we would jump rope together. And so I had no problem there. Matter of fact, I've never had a problem with white people. I'm sorry. Because my mother taught me as a little girl and read it from the Bible. We're all dirt, and we're all going back. We're just different shades.
I grew up in Bristol, and I'm old enough to remember the white and black drinking fountains at H.B. King's department store.
And also Woolworth's dime store. One said colored, and one said white. And my mother had some kind of layaway. People had layaways in those days at Woolworth's dime store. And the cashier was right beside of where the fountains were located. And you know how little kids are. They always want to drink out of a fountain. Well, the thing that always bothered me, the colored fountain always had debris in it, like peppermint chewing gum papers or any kind of debris. It was nasty. So I begged and begged my mother, let me drink. No, she said, you cannot drink out of the white water. She would say that. She'd keep talking to the lady. So this particular Saturday afternoon that we were there, she was in big conversation with the cashier. And I watched and watched, and I turned to the fountain, and I thought, I'm going to get some of this water to myself. And I leaned down and got me a big sip, and I stood up, and I remember saying out loud to myself, it tastes like that other water. I just had to see about that water fountain because the imagination of little kids. Well, see, my son was the last graduating class from Slater in 1965. He was the last one. And my daughter was a rising sophomore. She did not have the personality that my son has. He talks like I do all the time, but my second child was very quiet. So it was very difficult for her. And see what they did at Tennessee High School, they took two kids in the glee club, one black girl and one black boy. And my daughter loved to sing, but she wasn't included. And that's the way they set it up. And that was a very hard time for me because we had a 47 station wagon, old-timey station wagon. And I'd go to pick her up, and she'd come out the door just smiling and wave at the girls. And by the time the doors closed, she would start crying. We would cry all the way to home. But see what the white parents told their kids, don't bother those black kids. Just don't talk to them. Ignore them like they weren't there. And if you and I sat in a room all day and you totally ignored me, that's a very stressful and painful thing.
Oh, sure.
But you know, God is always good and always has a plan. I was one of the first to be nominated and was chosen for the board of directors at the YWCA way back in the 60s, the Christian organization. And one of the ladies had a daughter in the class with my Ramona, With my Connie. I've got so many kids, can't think which one. Ramona's the baby. Anyway, this young lady had a red convertible and lived in what they called then Willie Boone. I'd go to pick up this one particular day to pick Constance up, and she and the young lady came out the door just laughing. The young lady drove her home in the convertible. They became friends just because of the mother that was on the board with me at the Y. And that was the beginning of her 2 years of happiness at Tennessee High.
Mrs. Bell has given speeches on growing up here during segregation.
So I went down, and my subject was growing up in the Tri-Cities. And I told them from day one, different things that happened. You could have heard a pin fall on that carpet. That's the truth. One little boy came to me, one young man came to me afterwards, and he didn't cry, but his eyes were watery. And he said, Mrs. Bell, I could have listened to you talk all night. And the way I ended that little speech was, I'm not bitter. I don't hate any of you all. I love you. But please go out into the world and never let it happen again. And that's the way I ended it.
Living in the 21st century, it's hard to imagine a time when people were separated by law because of the color of their skin. And that generation is leaving us. In the not-so-distant future, there will be no one that lived through segregation. We need to listen closely to what this older generation has to say. We need to take what they say to heart. As Mrs. Bell asked, we can't ever let it happen again.